Planes lift off from one place and land in another. That's how it's supposed to be. And it should feel smooth, clear, and simple. But the reality is that sometimes things don't go the way they're meant to. Sometimes they fall apart. And what's even more unsettling is that sometimes we don't truly figure out what went wrong. And there's nothing more chilling than a mystery. So join us as we take a look at the 15 most shocking aviation mysteries that are still unsolved. Number 15. Amelia Earhart's disappearance. Well, it's widely accepted that Amelia Earhart perished decades ago, but the mystery behind her disappearance continues to stir debate. And it's an unusual case. Earhart wasn't just another pilot. She was amazing. In an era where women were constantly told what they couldn't do, she defied expectations. She broke numerous records, including being the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. Her presence stood as a symbol of empowerment and determination. Then, in 1937, while attempting to fly around the globe in a Lockheed Model 10E Electra, Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan vanished near Howland Island in the Pacific. Neither wreckage nor remains were ever found. Despite extensive efforts, the mystery remained. She was declared dead in 1939. Some suspect they crashed from fuel loss, while others believe they survived temporarily or were eaten by crabs. But no theory has been proven. Earhart's fate remains uncertain, and because of that, her legend continues to grow, long after her last flight ended. Number 14. The disappearance of Glenn Miller. Back in the 1940s, Glenn was one of the most celebrated musicians in the world. So popular, in fact, that he was invited to perform for troops during World War II. He was in the UK at the time, scheduled to travel to Paris. Though his plane took off without issue, it never arrived. Glenn and everyone else on board vanished without a trace. What makes it even more tragic is that Miller wasn't supposed to be on that flight. He had intended to leave earlier, but weather delays across the English Channel forced him to wait. When he finally boarded, he didn't notify anyone. By the time people realized he was missing, days had already passed. His plane was never located, and to this day, the cause remains unknown. The music world lost one of its greats, and despite various theories, no solid evidence has ever surfaced to explain what truly happened that day. Number 13. Egypt Air Flight 804. This case, like many others on this list, began as an ordinary flight. In 2016, Egypt Air Flight 804 departed for Cairo but never arrived. The Airbus A320 crashed into the Mediterranean Sea, killing all 66 passengers and crew. What made this event particularly unsettling were the early indicators. Smoke was detected in both the lavatory and avionics compartments moments before the crash. Yet no distress signal was issued by the pilots. The only alerts came from locator beacons after. Impact point investigations were launched by both Egyptian and French authorities. Their findings? Contradictory. The Egyptian report pointed to a small explosion leading to an onboard fire. Meanwhile, the French team attributed the disaster to a malfunction involving an oxygen mask. Years passed, but the disagreement remained unresolved. With conflicting reports and limited data, no official conclusion has ever been reached. Families were left in limbo, and the crash remains one of the most ambiguous tragedies in aviation history. Number 12. Pan Am Flight 7. It's unfortunate how often a crash story begins with the line, "No one knows what caused it," but in the case of Pan Am Flight 7, that's exactly where things stand. The flight was part of a global route and was on its way to Hawaii when it suddenly went down over the Pacific in 1957. Strangely, no alert was raised for over 9 hours. That delay proved critical. By the time the Coast Guard responded, the wreckage had already spread across the ocean. A large-scale search followed, and eventually, fragments of the aircraft and bodies of passengers were recovered. But as for why the crash happened, nothing definitive was ever found. Investigative reports offered vague possibilities, mechanical failure, sabotage, or design flaws, but none were proven. The conclusions were frustratingly inconclusive. Even with global attention and resources involved, the cause remained elusive. It became yet another aviation mystery that left more questions than answers, and no closure for the families involved. Number 11. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. This story stands out because the flight was military-related during the Vietnam War. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 was a U.S. military-chartered aircraft carrying personnel to Saigon. The plane departed from California, made a stop in Guam for refueling, and continued over the Pacific. But shortly after leaving Guam, it disappeared. There were 107 people on board, and none were ever found. A massive search effort followed, covering over 370,000 square kilometers of ocean, yet not a single trace surfaced. The only clue came from a passing tanker that reported witnessing an explosion in the sky around the time the flight vanished. But since no wreckage was found, nothing could be confirmed. It became the second largest aviation disappearance on record, just behind Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. With no physical evidence, no final transmission, and no explanation, the fate of Flight 739 remains unresolved. Number 10. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. The real story of this flight isn't just the crash, it's the survival that followed. In 1972, a chartered aircraft carrying a Uruguayan rugby team, family, and friends slammed into the Andes Mountains. The co-pilot mistakenly believed they had crossed into Chile and began descending, unaware they were still above mountainous terrain. The plane struck a ridge, instantly killing several passengers. Survivors were stranded in freezing conditions, surrounded by snow. Search efforts failed as the white fuselage blended into the landscape. Days became weeks. Starving and desperate, those who remained did the unthinkable. They ate the bodies of the dead to survive. Eventually, 2 passengers trekked 54 kilometers through harsh wilderness to find help. That mission saved 16 people. The incident remains one of the most shocking survival stories in aviation, not because of the crash itself, but because of the human instinct to endure. A tragedy that pushed people beyond their limits, into a place few could ever imagine. Number 9. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 was a routine flight from New York City to Seattle. It regularly covered this transcontinental route. But in 1950, during a night journey over Lake Michigan, the aircraft vanished. On board were 58 people. Moments before the disappearance, the pilot requested to descend. After that, there was silence. Witnesses on the ground later reported hearing strange engine noises and seeing flashes in the sky. A massive search followed, including extensive dives and sonar sweeps of the lake. But the full wreckage was never recovered. Only small pieces of the aircraft and some remains surfaced. The cause of the crash has never been definitively identified. Theories range from structural failure to a lightning strike or sudden turbulence, but nothing has ever been confirmed. The absence of solid evidence has made the case one of the most frustrating cold cases in aviation history. To this day, Flight 2501 remains missing beneath the waters of Lake Michigan. Number 8. Egypt Air Flight 990. Flight 990 crashed in 1999, and while it initially seemed like a standard aviation disaster, it quickly turned into something much darker. The plane went down in international waters, which meant both Egyptian and U.S. authorities had to investigate. That brought the FBI into the picture. Their findings suggested the crash wasn't mechanical, it had criminal undertones. However, Egypt's officials strongly disagreed, refusing to accept the FBI's claims. With no consensus, 2 versions of the event were released. The Egyptian report blamed mechanical failure, specifically flaws in the aircraft's design. On the other side, U.S. investigators pointed to human actions and deliberate interference. The aircraft involved was a Boeing 767, and Boeing itself was placed under scrutiny. In the end, no side gave in. Both governments stood by their separate conclusions, leaving the real cause buried under layers of conflicting reports. Even now, Egypt Air Flight 990 remains an unsolved tragedy that continues to stir controversy. Number 7. The disappearance of Steve Fawcett. There was a time when wealthy individuals sought adventure more than status. Steve Fawcett embodied that spirit. He wasn't just rich, he was driven. Fawcett was the first person to fly solo around the world in both a balloon and a fixed-wing aircraft without refueling. He constantly challenged limits, whether by air, land, or sea. But in 2007, he took off from a private airstrip in Nevada and vanished. That single flight triggered one of the largest private search operations ever mounted. Companies like Amazon and Google joined the effort, using satellite data and aerial scans. A year later, part of the plane was found in the Sierra Nevada mountains. As for Fawcett himself, only scattered remains were recovered, likely disturbed by wildlife. No official cause was ever determined, but weather and wind conditions were believed to be factors. It was a tragic end for someone whose life had been about pushing boundaries and exploring every frontier available. Number 6. Air India Flight 182. Now, we focus on Air India Flight 182. This tragedy isn't about unclear causes, it's about motives that still raise questions. In June 1985, the aircraft exploded mid-air during a transatlantic flight. The explosion was the result of a bomb planted by extremists. All 329 people on board lost their lives. For decades, it held the grim title of deadliest terrorist attack in aviation history, only surpassed by the events of September 11th. What makes this story worse is that only one individual was ever convicted. Investigations later revealed that flaws across multiple systems and agencies allowed the bomb to be placed on the flight in the first place. The breakdown in communication and security was stunning. Families were left with little justice and many unanswered questions. Though the cause was identified, the accountability has remained frustratingly limited. And for those affected, that sense of injustice has never fully faded. Number 5. Air France, Flight 447. When it comes to commercial aviation, there are two names that dominate the skies: Boeing and Airbus. Boeing was once considered the standard, but now faces scrutiny. Airbus, while seen as more reliable, has endured its own disasters, including Air France Flight 447. In 2009, this flight departed Rio de Janeiro en route to Paris. Initially, the journey was uneventful. Then, complications began. A frozen sensor caused incorrect speed readings, which deactivated the autopilot. The pilots tried to take manual control, but their actions caused the plane to stall. The aircraft crashed into the Atlantic, killing all 228. This became the deadliest incident involving the Airbus A330 and the worst in Air France's history. The issue stemmed from pitot tubes, a known problem that had not been resolved. The accident also exposed a gap in emergency training for pilots, a disaster that could have been prevented, but instead became aviation's most sobering failure. Number 4. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. No airline wants to be the first to set a grim record, but that's what happened with this airline. This flight became the first in aviation history to have over 300 confirmed fatalities. The crash occurred in 1974 on a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, a model already surrounded by safety concerns. The aircraft was traveling from Istanbul to London when a major malfunction caused it to crash into a forest near Paris, killing everyone on board. The problem was traced back to a cargo door that hadn't been secured properly. It detached mid-flight, leading to explosive decompression that destroyed the plane's control systems. What's worse is that the issue with the door was already known by the manufacturer, but was ignored. That same design flaw caused other incidents too. Eventually, the FAA grounded the DC-10s until proper fixes were enforced. But for the passengers of Flight 981, those warnings came too late. The damage was already done. Number 3. Japan Airlines Flight 123. Previously, Boeing's reputation was mentioned, and this case stands out as one of the most catastrophic reminders of engineering oversight. In 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 took off from Tokyo, bound for Osaka. Just 12 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft experienced explosive decompression. The tail section, which had been poorly repaired years earlier after a minor incident, failed completely. The result was the deadliest single aircraft accident in history, with over 500 people dying. Only 4 survived. The repair that failed had been done by Boeing, and the fault in that work directly contributed to the structural failure. What followed was absolute chaos in the sky as the pilots lost nearly all control. The crash was not caused by an engine, weather, or pilot error, but by a mechanical failure that should have been prevented. Investigations confirmed the poor workmanship, and the incident led to sweeping safety reforms. But the damage was done. Families were shattered, and the loss was immeasurable. Number 2. BSAA Star Aerial Disappearance. In 1949, the BSAA Star Aerial was en route from Bermuda to Kingston, Jamaica, on what should have been a routine flight. But it never arrived. No distress signal was ever sent, and no debris was ever recovered. Despite an extensive search, absolutely nothing was found. The plane simply vanished. Star Aerial was part of the British South American Airways fleet, a company founded by former wartime pilots to support long-distance trade. Oddly enough, this wasn't the only aircraft from the fleet to disappear in the Triangle. Its sister plane, the Star Tiger, had also gone missing under similarly strange circumstances. No foul weather had been reported during either flight, and because the aircraft vanished without a trace, every theory, from equipment malfunction to spatial anomalies, has been thrown around. Still, no confirmed explanation exists. The Star Aerial's disappearance remains one of aviation's quietest, most puzzling losses. Number 1. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. There are many ways to end this list, but if you're going to talk about aviation mysteries, there's only one place to end, and that's Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. This remains the most haunting and baffling aircraft disappearance ever recorded. And even now, no one truly knows what went down. The flight was supposed to be an ordinary journey from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Everything seemed routine until the aircraft strayed from its planned route. It vanished from civilian radar, was briefly picked up by military systems, and then was lost again. A global search effort launched across 120,000 square kilometers, the largest, most expensive in history, only turned up fragments. What happened on board, no one can say. Some suggest a hypoxia event caused the diversion. Others argue it was hijacked. But without wreckage, nothing's proven. The only upside of this incident is that aviation safety protocols have improved worldwide. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you soon.